This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. And it's a pretty positive start for the year as world stock markets got off to a confident start. That's after a third consecutive year of double-digit gains. Emerging market stocks hit three-week highs. That's after ending 2021 down about 4.5%. MSCI's index of emerging market stocks was up 0.2% on the day in some thin trading, with some markets still closed for New Year holidays. In Egypt, we saw a state-owned national bank announcing that it will be increasing its stake in the country's largest private bank, Commercial International, to 9.13% from 8.27% at the end of September. Now, also coming up on today's show, the U.S. cuts off 3 African nations from access to a duty-free trade program. Uganda to reopen its economy in phases after tough measures imposed to limit the spread of COVID-19. And global financial institutions express optimism on the economic recovery pace this year. Well, let's start off today's show in Sudan. The political stability of the country is once again in the spotlight. That's amid growing demands for a return to civilian rule. Now, Abdallah Hamdok has now resigned as a prime minister, further complicating the country's transition process. This development comes just 6 weeks after Hamdok was reinstated to his post. He had been ousted and placed under house arrest by the military during, of course, a takeover on October 25th. He was eventually reinstated in November in a deal that also called for an independent technocratic cabinet. However, since then, Hamdok has failed to name a government as protests against military rule continue across the country. Hamdok's resignation throws Sudan's political future deeper into uncertainty. The Prime Minister says he was unable to forge political consensus with the military and civilian coalition.
Even after the October 25th coup, we signed a framework with the military in an attempt to get back on track towards the democratic transition, to put an end to the bloodshed, for the release of prisoners, and to safeguard what had been achieved through the past 2 years, and to adhere to the constitutional declaration that governed the transition. This agreement was just another attempt at uniting all sides at the negotiating table and to agree on a document by which the rest of the transitional period could be completed. Based on everything I have mentioned, I decided to give back the responsibility and announce my resignation as Prime Minister, to give a chance to another man or woman of this noble country to continue leading our dear nation and help it pass through what's left of the transitional period to a civilian democratic country.
Meanwhile, even more protests are planned in Sudan on Tuesday, and in anticipation of these, the Technical Committee of the Security Council says that bridges around Khartoum will be closed, except for Halfaya and Soba bridges. Well, here's a look at more reactions following the move by Abdallah Hamdok to resign as Prime Minister.
Hamdok's resignation came late, but it was necessary. That's because Hamdok was one of the players with international access. Now we can get out of the access conflict because Sudan needs an independent national figure who can preserve Sudan's sovereignty from external interference, whether it is the intervention of the Axis or the countries of the region.
The time is not appropriate and we need him at a time like this. His resignation could open the doors to many problems in Sudan. We could lose martyrs and military could expand in power.
Although his resignation came late, but we needed it. So even though he put his hand with them, we cannot deny his grace, because we love him very much. But he is wrong, and may God forgive him. And thank you, Hamdok.
Well, let's shift our focus to Nigeria now, where President Muhammadu Buhari has signed off on his government's 2022 budget, which is a record $41 billion. This comes as Africa's largest economy struggles with soaring inflation. Last year's slump in oil prices, triggered by the coronavirus pandemic, was pretty hard on the continent's top producer, where we saw activity shrink by 1.8%, according to the World Bank. Although Nigeria has returned to growth this year, criminal attacks as well as kidnappings in the northwestern and central states have held it back, along with strong inflation in food prices. Government spending plans for next year are 26% higher than 2021. Meanwhile, Cameroon expects the economy to grow steadily to 4.2% in 2022 from 3.6% in 2021. That is as domestic demand rebounds. Now, President Paul Biya has said the nation will continue to provide fiscal stimulus to help accelerate the pace of recovery. Cameroon has been able to survive the pandemic impact on the economy, and that's thanks to the sustained mobilization of non-oil revenue, as well as the implementation of domestic budget consolidation measures and support from development partners. Fiscal reforms in the taxation and custom sectors have also boosted the country's capacity to mobilize funds from the international financial market. And in Uganda, works on the $3.5 billion East African crude oil pipeline are set to commence in the coming weeks. This follows the signing of an intergovernmental agreement in April between Uganda, Tanzania, and the oil firms Total and CNOOC. The over 1,400-kilometer pipeline will run from the oil fields in western Uganda to the port of Tanga in Tanzania. However, the project has suffered multiple delays, some stemming from the resistance from environmental groups. With that report, here's CGTN's Michael Baleke.
Early this year, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni, Tanzania's President Samia Hassan Suluhu, and oil companies France's Total and China's CNOOC agreed to kickstart the process of constructing a crude oil pipeline. Once completed, the EACOP will be the longest heated pipeline in the world. The project is expected to stimulate trade and investment, but also unlock the region's oil potential.
The project will yield revenues to both countries while creating short and long-term employment for both highly skilled and semi-skilled professionals, as well as casual laborers, thus addressing the unemployment challenge, especially among the youth.
Uganda discovered its oil in 2006 and has since confirmed 6.5 billion barrels in place. The pipeline is expected to export the crude oil to the international market through Tanzania's Indian Ocean port of Tanga. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni says the pipeline will strengthen the cooperation between the two countries, but also promote regional integration.
This pipeline project can be a core of bigger developments if the brothers in Congo and South Sudan choose to also use it for their oil. At the maximum, it can carry 230,000 barrels per day. Besides, the same corridor can take a return gas pipeline supplying Tanzanian and Mozambican gas to Uganda and the Great Lakes region.
Uganda has over the years revised its timelines for oil production, the latest being 2025. This is attributed to delays in negotiations over the oil investments and setting up of key infrastructure needed for oil production. The delays have frustrated local entrepreneurs seeking to tap in the black gold business.
This talk around opportunities in the oil and gas sector has taken long, and some SMEs took out loans, invested, and then waited, and things didn't turn out. There's a sense in which people feel that it's this proverbial wolf, that opportunities are coming.
However, the government insists concrete agreements have been signed and some projects are about to get off the ground. The East African crude oil pipeline has also suffered setbacks in funding, with some prospective lenders pulling out of the project citing environmental and social concerns. Uganda's oil and gas fields are found within national parks, near key lakes and rivers and forested lands. Conservationists argue that in case of a spill, the risk to the environment will be devastating.
Part or the majority of the oil that is going to be transported by the EACOP is going to be taken from Murchison Falls National Park. Now, we know that Murchison Falls National Park is one of Uganda's oldest and one of Uganda's largest national parks. The park is also one of the most biodiverse. It has a number of animals and a number of plants that are important in and for their own, because biodiversity must exist for itself, but also important for the survival of Ugandans and humanity at large.
But the government says they are working on legislation that is compliant with global climate laws to protect the environment, a move that is giving the funders more confidence to invest in the project. And the Petroleum Authority says the engineering designs for the pipeline are complete. Compensation plans for land acquisition are underway and procurement of logistics for the pipeline are in motion. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And moving on now, the United States has cut Ethiopia, Mali and Guinea from the AGOA Trade Preference Program. The African Growth and Opportunity Act legislation provides sub-Saharan African nations with duty-free access to the U.S. In a statement by the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, the move has been informed by actions taken by each of the governments in violation of the AGOA statute. Now, the decision by the U.S. follows a threat by President Joe Biden to cut out the three nations over alleged human rights violations and recent coup. Now, the statement said the Biden-Harris administration is deeply concerned by the unconstitutional change in governments in both Guinea and Mali and by the gross violations of internationally recognized human rights being perpetrated by the government of Ethiopia and other parties amid the widening conflict in northern Ethiopia. Ethiopia's trade ministry says it is extremely disappointed by Washington's announcement. It says the move will reverse economic gains and unfairly impact and harm women and children in the country. Well, let's now take a look at some corporate headlines today. The International Finance Corporation has announced plans to lend the Kenyan banking subsidiary of Equity Group $165 million. Now, the deal will be one of the largest single credit facilities offered to a local lender. IFC says its investment will enhance the bank's regulatory capital. It will also support its lending operations to climate-smart projects and small and medium enterprises in Kenya. And South African power utility Eskom says it expects clarity early this year on the start of its independent transmission unit, separating the business with generation and distribution arms to follow is all part of Eskom's strategy to return to profitability. Amongst the remaining steps is regulatory approval of electricity licenses for the new transmission company, which could take up to 120 days, according to the utility. The consent of lenders and creditors is also needed to complete the process. And Chinese tech giant Tencent, which has taken a stake in Monzo, is the latest international investor to join a funding round that values the UK digital bank at $4.5 billion. Now, Tencent's investment in Monzo is a $100 million top-up to a $500 million round led by the Abu Dhabi Growth Fund. The Chinese group's move allows a deal last July to buy Sumo Group, which is a games developer that has worked with Sony, Microsoft, and Sega. And finally, Tesla reported on Sunday that it delivered 936,000 cars in 2021. That's an 87% increase from the year before, despite the computer chip shortage that has disrupted auto production around the world. In the fourth quarter alone, Tesla delivered more than 308,000 vehicles, which is a 71% increase from the quarter a year earlier. The overwhelming share of the deliveries were of the Model 3 sedan and the Model Y hatchback. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, still to come on the show. Kenya's national carrier and South African Airways move closer to establishing an African airline, and works on the $3.5 billion East African crude oil pipeline set to commence in the coming weeks.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Marawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
View of this front line position.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Let's go to South Africa now, where the first part of a much-anticipated report into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud will be published this week. Over the past few years, the state capture inquiry has heard testimony from hundreds of witnesses who spoke out about alleged corruption in government and in state-owned enterprises during former President Jacob Zuma's reign. Now, according to the government, the state will not be able to determine how those implicated in corruption will be handled until the report had been properly scrutinized. The Commission of Inquiry into Allegations of State Capture says that it will submit its report in 3 parts. The second part is expected at the end of next month and the last part at the end of February. Now, elsewhere, Kenya's economy rebounded in the third quarter of the year following the easing of COVID-19 containment measures. According to Kenya's National Bureau of Statistics, East Africa's biggest economy grew 9.9% year-on-year during the quarter. During a similar period in 2020, the economy contracted by 2.1% at a time when the economy was still reeling from the effects of the pandemic. Now, manufacturing, transportation and financial activities grew by 9.5%, 13% and 6.7% respectively. That's while electricity and water supply recorded an accelerated growth of 4.5%. The agricultural sector, which is a backbone of Kenya's economy, contracted by 1.8% in the third quarter, and that's due to drought conditions which were witnessed in most parts of the country. And staying in Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta has announced that Kenya Airways and South African Airways will combine operations to form a new carrier, a Pan-African airline. During his visit to South Africa last November, Kenyatta witnessed the signing of a strategic partnership framework between the two airlines to form a Pan-African airline group by 2023. Now, KQ, which had predicted a grim full-year performance due to the COVID-19 crisis, made a net loss of over $100 million in the 6 months to June 2021. Its will-be partner, SAA, returned to operations in late September after a one-year hiatus. Well, joining us in Johannesburg right now to discuss this still further is Desmond Latham. He is an aviation analyst. Great to have you with us on the show today, Desmond. Now, let's start off with the fact that both Kenya Airways and South African Airways realistically have made significant losses in the past few years, and they've also lost quite a lot of market share to rival firms in their different markets. In light of this, what are your views on the viability of this plan, which is basically a Pan-African partnership going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Kenyan Airlines lost $333 million in the last year, and SAA owes around $700 million. So I think if you're a mathematician, you put two minuses together, you get a plus, but you don't get that in aviation. You just get two minuses. So, I mean, your question is very valid. What kind of growth are we looking at here going forward with the Omicron variant still affecting the outlook for aviation? So as you said, it's for 2023, but SAA has lost a lot of its previous destinations to competitors. They've been eating their lunch, SAA's lunch here from South Africa and also further afield. So I think the jury's pretty much out on what's going to happen, but I do think that with the state of Kenya and the state of South Africa supporting their national airlines, there is an opportunity here for some kind of regional process to kick off what's supposed to have happened through the Yamoussoukro Declaration in 1999. Many of the regional entities are starting to move towards hubs, regional hubs. So I think that's one of the opportunities here.
Well, since the COVID pandemic, it seems like African airlines are sort of putting more emphasis now on collaboration and consolidation going forward rather than competition. Looking at this as a new business model, what are your views on this strategy, especially when it comes to addressing the sustainability of African airlines?
Well, the majority of the money coming into the airlines is in dollars and from tourism. And if that doesn't go back to what it was similar to 2019 as quickly as possible, then many of the airlines will continue to suffer. But with that said, there's a need for states in Southern Africa and East Africa and West Africa and North Africa to interrelate, if you like. And through our commodities and other economies, there's a need for the growth of business. So that's the motivation here. And if you look at the consolidation going on, you're right. When you look at the single air, the African air transport market, which was supposed to have kicked us off, you have Rwanda and Qatar working on a joint partnership, and you've got Emirates. It's been working with airlines in South Africa, for example, the smaller airlines. So a lot of the partnerships that are building on the weaknesses that have been expressed through the last year, particularly 2 years, of state-owned airlines being picked up by the more independent airlines and then other international operations. That's the consolidation, is having big partners and local partners working together.
Well, on that note, I'd like to get your views on the sort of new normal for the aviation sector going forward. It seems like they've been forced to reset their business models and strategies in order to weather this crisis. What are your thoughts on what we'll be looking at going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Looking at the cargo side, the cargo figures are much higher than they were in 2019, but that's only 2 to 5% of operations of airlines. They need more than 90% comes from passengers who pay. So we've seen Cathay Pacific, for example, it's in real trouble in Hong Kong, one of the big players on the market, because of China's shutdown and also because of other things that are going on in terms of their business model. Singapore Airlines is beginning to eat Cathay Pacific's lunch. If you look at that, the Changi airport at Singapore is taking over from Hong Kong. Looking at the airline support revenue, passenger kilometers have dropped down to levels that we've never seen. So overall, we're looking at innovation, the cost of travel. So a lot of the newer planes, which are 15 to 20% cheaper to operate, Airbus and Boeing's latest planes, they're going to be snapped up pretty quickly by these airlines who will be able to pick up the market as we emerge from this pandemic, which in South African terms, it looks like we're doing at the moment. I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but Omicron is basically tailing off, and we pretty much opening up here. I think the first country in the world to do it after experiencing headwinds. So I think our regional look is looking quite positive. And so you're going to see regional hubs developing. You're going to see agreements between countries, like for like countries, and you're going to see much more innovation. Electric planes are going to come up pretty quickly now, and the more fuel-efficient planes are going to take over from the older aircraft flying across the world.
Well, that sounds pretty interesting. Many thanks for those great insights, Mr. Latham. That, of course, is Desmond Latham, an aviation analyst joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's shift gears to Uganda, where President Yoweri Museveni has said the country's economy will be opened in a phased manner. When the first case of COVID-19 was registered in the country, the government put in place tough measures to limit the spread of the virus. But some of those measures have caused significant damage to the country's economy. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with the details.
President Yoweri Museveni had earlier announced a full reopening of the Ugandan economy this January. But figures from the Ministry of Health show the country is registering a fast rise in new COVID-19 cases. On Friday, the country recorded more than 1,600 new cases, and medical experts attribute the new infections to the highly transmissible Omicron variant. The president says the sectors of the economy like bars and entertainment centers, which have remained closed since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, will now be allowed to open, but with caution. Public transport will be fully operational, but all passengers should be fully vaccinated and wearing masks. Schools have also been allowed to reopen, but in a phased manner to limit congestion. Night curfew restrictions will be lifted for all, apart from motorcycle taxis, commonly known as the border. However, the president has put a condition that all measures may be reversed if the situation gets out of hand. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, in Egypt, the pandemic did affect key sectors. Some companies are just now picking up after periods of pandemic-induced closure and near liquidation as the new year begins. While business owners, analysts, and policymakers continue to assess the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and cautiously set hopeful strategies for business recovery in 2022. Here's CGTN's Yasser Akim with more from Cairo.
The coronavirus pandemic has become a game-changer for countries worldwide. The fallout from the epidemic led to a disruption in global supply chains, increase in global energy prices, and shortages of products and commodities. This has led the Egyptian government to reshape its economic strategy.
I have to look now at my own industry. I have to strengthen local production. Strengthening local industries should no longer be just a theory. No, it must be the base we should build on in a systematic and well-studied plan, and to relieve all obstacles so we can be self-sufficient and cover all our needs as a state and as a population. We have to significantly reduce our imports. This is our new goal, especially after what we have gone through globally because of COVID-19 pandemic.
Policies to drive business recovery and improve the climate for industrial growth are aimed at reducing dependence on other nations for basic goods and necessities. That's on the macro level. On the micro level, the last couple of years have been a difficult learning curve for entrepreneurs, such as Ahmed Mustafa, who owns a small steel casting plant.
It was a tough time for everyone, which led us to think outside the box. We provided apartments for the workers inside the factory, and we agreed with them to live here for a month and go home for a week. So a week's vacation every month. We applied all anti-COVID measures here, and this was easier to control as workers did not mix with outsiders. Our production increased during the pandemic because we were not affected by any lockdowns or curfews, as the workers were already living and working inside the factory.
Mustafa says he also learned to always keep larger stocks of raw materials to avoid supply shortages in the future. The COVID-19 crisis has also shed light on the pivotal role played by the central bank to protect the economy from sudden shocks. It has launched several initiatives, including ones to support the real estate, the small and medium enterprises, the tourism sector, and digital transformation.
The effect was evident that these initiatives helped the state achieve positive growth rates, unlike most countries worldwide. GDP growth continued even amidst the peak of the crisis. Exchange rate remained stable, national projects didn't stop and continued as planned. That's because the central bank was not reactive. It had a strong emergency strategy that benefited the state, unlike other countries where banks were a burden.
Officials are now building on all these experiences to be the core of the government's economic policies for the medium and long term. Yes Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, since the start of the coronavirus, a slew of cyber attacks have dominated the headlines. Amid a rising demand for online services in Africa, the continent has become particularly vulnerable to the crime wave. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola now exploring how rising cyber threats are set to not just hamper Africa's economic recovery, but also cause long-lasting damage.
A continent-wide cybersecurity concern is the increasing number of ransomware or cyber extortion attacks.
Only 30% of the public services organization that participated said they are prepared for this threat. And I guess the key takeaway, what I found, is that 5% of the participants that we surveyed said they would pay out in case they were attacked. 4% said they did pay out.
Cyber attacks come in many forms, and businesses and countries react and cope differently. But when it comes to advanced persistent threat attacks, they are generally state-sponsored and go largely undetected, sometimes for years. Everyone is equally exposed.
I would say that no one is prepared for advanced persistent threat attacks, no one, because they would use our zero-day exploits and there wouldn't be a 100% protection for such kind of threats. But on average, South Africa does good compared to some regions on the world regarding cyber criminal mass-scale attacks.
Looking ahead to 2022, and IT security managers are worried about the actions of the US authorities as they go after the ransomware gangs, driving them to other continents.
We will see more attacks, particularly against critical infrastructure. And something that has been forecasted on a global scale is that the ransom demands will become higher. These guys have money to spend. They will buy what's called zero-day vulnerabilities to make their attacks more efficient. And it's just a much bigger threat than it's already been this year.
Ganeva says that advanced persistent threat attacks are an increasing reality on the continent.
APT actors that were not present here before would enter the region for their particular reasons, driven by the relations between different countries, the economic situation, the investments in the African continent. And we probably will face more APT actors present in the African continent.
Cybersecurity and cyber threats are increasing on the African continent as the continent opens up to include more businesses. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still to come on the show. Global financial institutions express optimism on the economic recovery this year. And Germany set to switch off 3 of its last 6 nuclear plants. Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And now here's a quick recap of top headlines this hour. Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has announced his resignation amid widespread pro-democracy protests. Now, Hamdok's move on Sunday came as mass protests denouncing both the military's power grab and its subsequent deal with the outgoing premier gripped Sudan for weeks. Hamdok's resignation marks the latest upheaval in the country's fragile transition to democracy following the removal of longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir in 2019. And at least 6 people have been killed in an attack by Al-Shabaab militants in Kenya's coastal county of Lamu. According to authorities, one of the victims was shot dead, another was hacked to death, while 4 were burnt to death in their homes. The Lamu County Commissioner said an operation against the attackers is currently underway. The attack appeared to have been anticipated by security agencies, who said the gang had been sighted on the move in the larger Boni forest. And South African health authorities believe that the country has passed the peak of its 4th wave of infections. Health officials reported a nearly 30% drop in new COVID cases, prompting the easing of some restrictions. South Africa has been amongst the hardest hit on the continent, with 3.5 million infections and around 91,000 deaths since the start of the pandemic. And finally, firefighters in South Africa say the huge blaze at the country's parliament in Cape Town has been brought under control. A man has been arrested in connection with the fire and will appear in court on Tuesday. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, global financial institutions have expressed cautious optimism on an economic recovery pace this year. The International Monetary Fund says that global recovery continues, but the momentum has weakened and uncertainties have risen. Now, according to the IMF, the global economy will grow 5.9% in 2021 and 4.9% in 2022. According to the OECD's economic outlook, the global recovery is continuing, but its momentum has eased and is becoming increasingly imbalanced. The institution's outlook projects a rebound in global economic growth to 5.6% in 2021 and 4.5% in 2022. Meanwhile, the World Bank says the global economy is experiencing a strong but uneven recovery. Growth is concentrated in a few major economies, with most emerging markets and developing nations lagging behind. Meanwhile, 4,000 passengers and crew have evacuated a German cruise ship in the Portuguese capital, fleeing a COVID-19 outbreak. 64 people tested positive on board, and port authorities in Lisbon say another 12 cases were detected on land. Now, passengers were taken by bus to Lisbon's airport. And the highly contagious Omicron variant continues to spread around the world. In Europe, Bulgaria has detected its first 12 cases. The country has offered a one-off cash bonus of about $44 to pensioners who opt to get vaccinated or to get a booster shot. Bulgaria is the EU's least vaccinated member state. Now, Omicron has also caused travel disruptions globally, with over 4,000 flights cancelled on on Sunday. The U.S. alone experienced more than 2,000 cancellations. The country's Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, has tested positive with mild symptoms. Austin last met with President Joe Biden on December 21st, more than a week before he started experiencing symptoms. The U.S. has seen unprecedented case numbers as it continues to grapple with the Omicron variant. Here's Mandy Geither reporting.
A new year, continued concern, record numbers of COVID-19 cases in the U.S.
Omicron is truly everywhere,
disrupting a normalcy Americans were hoping to see in 2022.
What I am so worried about over the next month or so is that our economy is going to shut down, not because of policies from the federal government or from the state governments, but rather because so many of us are ill.
U.S. airlines already affected. Sick crews, winter storms have led to more than 2,300 more flights being canceled today, bringing the total to more than 13,000 cancellations since Christmas Eve.
We should anticipate huge delays and disruptions in that, all transportation hubs.
Healthcare services exhausted after several surges of the virus, stretched thin again by a growing number of COVID-19 patients, some states calling in the National Guard for help.
We're managing, but we're getting sick. And it's a staffing issue for our hospitals right now, particularly our emergency departments.
As students return to school, unprecedented numbers of children with COVID being admitted to the hospital, healthcare experts say the vast majority unvaccinated.
Whether adults or children, we're not seeing the same level of severity. But if you're unvaccinated, that's the group still at highest risk.
I'm Mandy Gaither reporting.
Well, let's go to Germany now, where 3 nuclear-fired power plants are being taken off the electricity grid. The shutdowns are in line with the country's plans to end atomic power, which is a decision made a decade ago following a reactor meltdown in Japan. From Berlin, CGTN's Trent Murray reports.
Well, it was back in 2011 that former Chancellor Angela Merkel first promised to phase out nuclear power. Her pledge had come within weeks of Japan's Fukushima nuclear disaster, an event which not only shocked many people here in Germany, but also created political pressure for Merkel. Herself, a trained quantum chemist, could now see that many in Germany were worried about the perceived risks associated with the nuclear industry. That makes the shutdown of these 3 nuclear reactors a significant moment. Merkel's original promise was for Germany to phase out nuclear power by 2022. And with the closure of the 3 plants in Schleswig-Holstein, Lower Saxony and Bavaria, that keeps that timeline on track. It leaves Europe's biggest economy with just 3 reactors remaining, but they too are now on borrowed time, with the Environment Ministry pledging to power them all down by the end of 2022 at the latest. Now, nuclear accounts for about 10% of Germany's electricity production, and the shutdown has prompted some uncomfortable questions about how the void will be filled. But the new government, led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz, has set a goal of generating about 80% of the country's electricity from renewable sources like wind and solar by the year 2030. Energy policy is always highly political in Germany, not just because of how important tackling climate change is to vast swathes of the population, but also because in many ways it underpins the country's complicated relationship with Russia. About 40% of Germany's natural gas imports come from Russia, and with gas prices rising right as winter sets in, President Vladimir Putin has promised to come to the rescue, saying the Kremlin-backed Nord Stream 2 pipeline has now been filled with gas and is ready to go, pending the final regulatory approvals from authorities here in Berlin. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
Well, let's now turn back to one of our top stories today. The United States made a decision to cut Ethiopia, Mali, and Guinea from the AGOA trade program. The African Growth and Opportunity Act provides sub-Saharan African nations with duty-free access to the U.S. market. Well, let's now discuss the implications of this decision with Tebabu Asefa, who is a founder of Blessed Coffee and also the U.S.-Africa Diaspora Business Collaboration. Great to have you with us on the show today. Now, it certainly has been a tough period for Ethiopians. They were already dealing with the impacts of COVID-19 and, of course, civil conflict. To what extent, Mr. Tebabu, do you believe this delisting from AGOA will, of course, impact business activities, not just in Ethiopia, but in Mali and Guinea too?
All right, thank you for this opportunity. Before I dive into that, let me quickly give you a context. What America is doing currently, actually, what the Biden administration is doing currently is contrary to the objective core principles of American foreign policy, which is A, promoting democracy, peace, and commerce here and in the world. So this action, which is very short-sighted, is directly in contradictory to the American foreign policy. That's number one. Number two, for the last 3-4 years, America has been positioning herself to regain the market that she lost in Africa. In 2018, she enacted a new law called the Build Up Act and restructured her international financial institution to aggressively invest in Africa and created a development finance cooperation and allocated $40 billion to invest in Africa to push back the Chinese presence. And Ethiopia was the first country the CEO of DFC visited in 2018. Africa is large, Africa is rising, Africa is a big market, and Americans are very concerned about the Chinese dominance, and they want to pull their value chain. So looking at this too, in the short and the long term, America delisting Ethiopia, Mali, and Guinea is a short-sighted, contrary to our interest. That said, let me zoom quickly. Let me give you an example. I was just in Ethiopia about 3 months ago and visited a very vibrant, upcoming city in the southwest called Hawassa. Population 400,000. There is a growing industry there. And one of the growing industry in Hawassa is the garment industry. And the population is 400. About 100,000 people are directly impacted by this because they have employment in the industrial park of Hawassa directly related to the garment industry that supplies the US market. And this is American foreign direct investment, including the diaspora. So about 1/4 of the population of Hawassa will be directly impacted by this move. These are young women employed within the last 5 to 10 years who are earning a decent income and supporting a family. So by the stroke of the pen, President Biden is committing, taking good paying job away from young and vibrant Africans. That is very, very, very cruel. And when you take that nationwide, all over Ethiopia, similar industry, about 1.2 million people are directly impacted by this move. And in the future, as you mentioned, I'm a founder of Blessed Coffee, which aspires to give 500,000 small coffee farmers organized under one cooperative union to collectively invest and have a competitive edge on the market in the US. These are hardworking small farmers who are marginalized from the global economy. And this opportunity that we created, Blessed Coffee, or Benefit Corporation for Africa, would provide them a collective investment. We worked on this model for the last 15 years. This is a model for Africa. Literally, the 500,000 people we're partnering with are invited to invest $9 per farmer. Right. $9 per farmer, 500,000, that is $4.5 million. I'm going to match that up from my impact investors and create a roasting facility where the farmers will own a 50% of ownership. This is a model we're put in the own place. It's an international trade gives towards development to redefine U.S.-Africa trade vis-a-vis the African diaspora.
Well, I want to delve more into that with you because Ethiopia's foreign ministry has called the move misguided. It said it's unjustified intimidation. What do you think then this bodes for the U.S. political and economic relationship with Ethiopia and, of course, the rest of Africa going forward?
to put it bluntly, the Biden administration is committing suicide, neglecting and undermining American foreign policy, American foreign interests, as well as Ethiopia is a nation of 110 million people, consequential country in the Horn of Africa and in the Middle East. The region is very, very critical. That's a strategic, geopolitically very important region. So the move will destabilize that area, that region. That itself is a concern. And then when you really examine the reason why they're using this trade bill as a political tool, is another issue which is debatable at best. And they're not even justified on that level because they are trying to put in place, they're trying to force a democratically elected government by 72% of the eligible voters overwhelmingly voted for the current administration in Ethiopia over the previous one who's trying to come back to power. And America supporting the previous government that was rejected by the people of Ethiopia, that ruled Ethiopia for 27 years by fierce power, atrocity, and looting the country, and the American government siding on the side of the previous government to have the current government come to the table using such a tool, misguided and cruel, unfair, and unjustified.
Well, we definitely understand your passion. Many thanks for joining us on the show. We do have to leave it there, but thank you for giving us your perspective there. That, of course, was Mr. Tebabu Asefa. He's a founder of Blessed Coffee and the U.S.-Africa Diaspora Business Collaboration. Well, on that note, let's turn our attention to commodity markets today. Oil prices rose towards $79 a barrel. They were supported by tight supply and, of course, hopes of further demand recovery in 2022. Now, Libya announced that oil output will be cut by 200,000 barrels per day for a week due to pipeline maintenance. Also, the oil cartel OPEC and its allies are expected to stick to a plan to raise output gradually at a meeting on Tuesday. Meanwhile, gold prices slipping over 8% as higher bond yields and rallying equities weighed on the metal safe haven appeal as the new year gets underway. Well, let's go to Uganda now, where self-proclaimed Ugandan wastepreneur Faith Aweko saw an opportunity to turn plastic waste into fashionable pieces. Now, Aweko collects bits of discarded waste and turns them into durable and sustainable handbags. This provides a solution by diverting some of the waste that would otherwise end up littering the city and clogging vital sewage systems. Take a look.
Kampala, Uganda's capital, churns out 1,000 tons of garbage per day, according to the National Environment Management Authority. But what many see as trash was viewed as a solution-based business opportunity, turning plastic waste from landfill sites into fashionable handbags.
I like to call myself a wastepreneur because I deal in waste, and this is something that most people don't want to associate with. Waste, plastics, dump sites, garbage, and yet this is something that is providing employment to women who are collecting the waste, to women who are sorting, to women who are washing, and also women who are processing and making the beautiful bags that Reform Africa is making. And then we are also able to provide an income for ourselves and the other employees, and I'm also championing in saving the environment.
The Reform Africa team regularly collects, washes and hangs out discarded plastic bags from Kampala's dump sites. Aweko has employed 8 women whom she trained and hired from the surrounding community.
I am very happy with this job because it has transformed my life very much. It has created a living for me and my child. I am now also able to assist my spouse when he's struggling. This job has really helped me. The other thing I like about it is that we empty communities of these polythene bags, which saves the environment.
Once the bags are clean and dry, Aweko uses what she calls a heat presser to flatten and fuse them together. The pieces are then cut into patterns and stitched together to create colorful bags and accessories. Aweko's bags sell for between $16 and $25 in local shops and international markets, while using social media platforms to land more clients. Aweko is a graduate of the Social Innovation Academy outside of Kampala, which helps young aspiring social entrepreneurs take their ideas to the market.
We have shops both here in Uganda and also in Europe. In Uganda here we have 6 shops, 4 in Kampala and 2 upcountry that retail our products on a commission base. And we also do wholesale to international market. We have over 8 shops that wholesale our products. That's in America and also in Europe.
Aweko says the jobs and positive effect on the environment she is creating more than make up for all the hard work and criticism. Part of her vision for the Reform Africa project is to encourage more Ugandans to recycle and help people learn new income-generating skills. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Let's go to Nigeria now, where restaurants, parks, gardens and other outdoor businesses are now reporting good sales this festive season. That's months after reopening following closures due to COVID-19. Restrictions on public gatherings by the government to curb the spread of the virus took a toll on them last year, leading to many job losses. With that report, here's Tessem Akende.
Atiku Sanki manages a fast food business in Jos. He says they made a lot of sales and profit this festive season, unlike last year when there was a lockdown due to COVID-19.
The response from the post-lockdown pandemic era has been good for us particularly. People seem to be eager to come out and do the things they were used to doing. So business has been good.
Atiku's business is just one of many trying to cash in on the festive season while remaining cautious of the coronavirus. The World Bank attributes 42% of overall job losses in Nigeria between 2020 and 2021 to the outbreak of the pandemic.
Well, the lockdown did actually bad, very, very bad, because most businesses, small-scale businesses have actually been crumbled, and there were limited need of manpower in most organizations, so it actually did bad.
Economic analysts say businesses in the country would blossom better through credits and loans from the government.
The government should actually develop a model in which they will help the citizens. They can actually give out soft loans to business-minded people, to those that are already in business, so that it can enable them to boost their businesses and they will do well. And the issue of unemployment will be bygone.
The Nigerian government says it is committed to supporting businesses in the country.
The government says it has earmarked nearly $200 million to support businesses impacted especially by the coronavirus pandemic. About 1 million people are expected to benefit from the credit support.
Atiku hopes he will be able to obtain a grant from the government and that there won't be lockdowns in future. And he says he is hungry to expand his business. Tessem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
And before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand on course for its best session in 2 months, although it did slip in early trading today as a surge of infections in other countries remained a concern for investors. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling, little change today with remittances and dollar inflows from non-governmental organizations meeting importer demand in the country. And that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.